Hi guys, Dr. Gillard here. It is week 10. This is the last dermatology lecture of the quarter, and we're talking about moles. It's spring of 2021. It's Wednesday. Here we go. What is a mole anyway? Is that a mole? That's one type of mole. That's not what we're talking about. And that's a mole. You guys know what moles are. Oh god, there's a dreaded mole. Remember general chemistry days. Now we're talking about this thing. That's a mole. And of course in dermatology we don't call it a mole, we call it a nevus. Specifically a melanocytic nevus, but commonly just called a nevus. Nevi is plural. And it is a very common, so common that almost all humans have at least one of these things. 55% of adults have between 10 and 45 nevi on their bodies, and that are bigger than 2 millimeters. It is a tumor, but it's a benign tumor of the skin typically. It's usually more common on sun-exposed areas, so the back of your hand, your forearm, back of your shoulders, your face. Where do they come from, or what causes them? Well, one theory, they're not 100% sure, but one theory says that they come from the precursors to melanocytes. And like a baby melanocyte is called a melanoblast, and it's a mutated melanoblast. It's definitely not a mutated melanocyte. It's a melanoblast, according to most authors. These mutated melanoblasts are given the name nevus, nevus cells. Okay, so a nevus cell is just a mutated melanoblast. So you don't usually say, oh, the group of melanoblasts looks irregular. It's usually a group of nevi or nevi cells, or nevus cells, or nevi, you could say plural. That's what they are. But a nevi is really just a mutated melanoblast. So these nevus cells tend to kind of hang out together. They're social. They like to group together into nests. So groups of nevus cells are called nests. And the nests typically start to develop right in the junction between the dermis and the epidermis. So the dermal-epidermal junction is where they set up shop, and then they tend to grow downward with the passage of time. But even though they grow into the dermis, this is one example of a non-cancerous type of skin lesion that can grow into the dermis. There's 3 different types we'll look at. But so here's the dermis down here. This is the epidermis, all the layers, of course. And down here at the bottom, very bottom of the epidermis, we have a group of these nest cells. And these cells have the ability to divide via mitosis. And they divide. As they divide, the baby ones are pushed up and up and up and up and up. And that's basically what a mole is. It's just a bunch of these nevus cells that have been replicated. Okay, they're just like the other skin cells, right? Those are ratcheted up. We've talked about that before. These same. They slough off as well, and they need to be replaced. So you look at your mole right now, those same cells that you see right now, next week they won't be the same. They'll look the same, but they'll technically be a little different cells. Yeah, and it could be there the rest of your life. It may not be there. They can disappear with old age as well. I should have added in there. In fact, the ones I've had, got into my 60s now, the ones I've had on my hands for my whole life are gone. So they do disappear as you get old. They can, for sure. Nevus cell versus melanocyte. What's the difference between a mature melanocyte and this mutated melanoblast, which we call a nevus cell? Well, the melanocytes, they're larger in size, so they differ from normal melanocytes in these ways. So nevus cells are larger in size. They don't have the little octopus arms. They don't have dendrites, so they can't inject anything with melanin except themselves. They have melanin, but it stays inside themselves. That's why they're dark in color. They have, because they're bigger, they have more cytoplasm. They also have these melanin-containing granules, which gives them a dark color compared to your keratinocytes, usually much darker than keratinocytes do. Embryologically speaking, where do they come from? Well, they're melanoblasts, and we know melanoblasts come from neural crest cells. So they're neural crest in origin, just like, in that regard, they're similar. There's 3 different presentations. They typically start out in the bottom of the stratum basale, as we said, and they migrate deeper and deeper into the dermis. That gives us 3 different looks. So there are 3 different types, and there's way more different types of nevi than this. I mean, there's all atypicals, Spitz lesion. We're not going to get in, don't have time to get into all the atypical. But the basic 3 types that you need to know are junctional, compound, and dermal. And that usually is in relationship to their age. These are usually new ones, these are middle-aged, and these are older. It doesn't always work like that, but typically they go through this projection. All right. Yeah, I mean, you can call these type A, B, and C nevus cells as well. I'm going to call them junctional, compound, and dermal. And they're found at different depths. So these are superficial. These are in the stratum basale. The nest is in the stratum basale and upper part of the dermis. Compound means it's about in the middle. The nest lives in the middle of the dermis. And dermal means the nest is quite deep in the dermis. Right? A nice little cartoon showing the nest would be, let's see, did I turn on my drawing tools? I did. So the nest would be right here. So that's a junctional nevus. The nest would be about in the middle of the dermis. That's where all the active dividing occur. These cells are just ratcheted up from the division of these nests, this little nest of nevus cells. And then the dermal nevus, the nest would be down here. See how that works? In fact, they're so deep sometimes that by the time these cells, they don't make it all the way to the top anymore. And then you'll still have a bump, but maybe it will be skin color. Although I'm getting ahead of my slides. Here's the histological. Here's the histological analysis of this. These are real nest cells here. Pretty close. There's the top. There's the dermis, or the top of the epidermis. There's the stratum corneum there. Stratum basale. So this is probably a junctional nevus. Colors. So yeah, they are typically pigmented. The younger ones, they produce varying amounts of melanin. Remember, they don't have tentacles, so they can't inject their neighbor cells with it. But they can't get rid of it, so it's stored inside of them. So they are various shades of brown and black when they start out. Remember, a melanocyte has tentacles, and the melanocyte injects all the neighbors with all these keratinocytes. Its job is to protect. Its job is to inject these keratinocytes with melanin, and then you get the melanin forms a cap, kind of a nuclear cap, which protects the keratinocytes from UV radiation damage. And the great irony is the melanocyte is injecting all these and protecting them, but it forgets to do itself. It has no nuclear cap itself, therefore it is susceptible to UV radiation, and that causes melanoma. And as we said, as they get older, they grow, the nest moves down and down. They may stop producing melanin, or maybe the melanin is faint, and you still can have the raised lesion, but it lacks color. So this is an old, this is a, let's see, this is a compound. It's warty enough and it's big enough. I think I would call it a dermal nevus, because it's warty enough and looks big enough, and we'll get into that. But it can be skin color, but those are usually the more mature ones that do that. Acquired versus congenital, so about 1% of nevi are seen at birth. And my granddaughter has one on her hand, a little one she was born with. Most of them are not, but when you're born with them, they're called congenital melanocytic nevi. If they pop up, they usually pop up during childhood, then they're called acquired melanocytic nevi. You don't have to worry about those. The congenital ones you have to be a little more careful with, not so much the tiny ones, but there can be some really big congenital melanocytic nevi, which we're going to talk about. These are called birthmarks. When you're born with them, they're called birthmarks. But they're just nevi. They're just moles. But you're born with them. But they're a little more worrisome, as we'll see. So congenital melanocytic nevi can get really large. Acquired melanocytic nevi never usually bigger than 1.5 centimeters is about the biggest they'll ever get. Congenital melanocytic nevi look like this. I mean, that's why they call it a birthmark. Now, my granddaughter's is a tiny little, it's a tiny little beauty mark, she calls it. Right? That's not worrisome. This is more worrisome because it's big enough that it does have a chance of becoming cancerous, and that has to be watched. Can cause psychosocial issues, and usually it's not a big deal. We'll look at some ones that are big deals, though. Congenital melanocytic nevi. Let's go down this rabbit hole called birthmarks. They're tiny to huge. Differential diagnosis is cafe-au-lait spots. Of course, we've talked about that, I think, seen in neurofibromatosis 1. The difference is cafe-au-lait spots are more like coffee with cream in it, the coffee type color. And congenital melanocytic nevi are usually much, much darker. And they can get hairy, and we'll see the deal. So here's someone with cafe-au-lait spots and a patient with neurofibromatosis 1. And yeah, they look coffee color. These are not birthmarks. Those are cafe-au-lait spots. How do you classify CMN, congenital melanocytic nevi? We'll just call it CMN. Well, you classify them by the diameter, and there's other ways to do this, but you classify them by how wide they are. What's the diameter? The biggest diameter of the lesion is used to classify it. If it's under 15 millimeters or under 1.5 centimeters, it's classified as a small CMN. And between 1.5 and less than 20 is a medium CMN. And between 20 and less than 50 is a large CMN. And once in a blue moon, you get the giant CMN. Those are greater than 50 centimeters, and those are huge. They have some AKAs. Congenital or giant congenital melanocytic nevi, bathing trunk nevi, because they usually happen down by the bathing suit line. Giant hairy nevi is another one, and all sorts of AKAs. And yeah, the giant hairy nevi, you can see this is one right here. It is hairy. It's huge. They can also have associated smaller CMN with that. So you can see all these little associate spots associated with that. And there's another pretty big one. That's probably a large to medium one right there. But they are common. If you have one big one, they're commonly associated with satellites as well. And yeah, as they get older, they can start growing hair. So here's one that started developing hair in this 20-something-year-old. It can sometimes be fairly normal, but oftentimes it's very coarse, like a horse hair almost. Have you ever seen a horse hair? And the hair is usually brown. It can be red and pink on occasion. I've never seen one like that. Here is a giant congenital melanocytic nevi with many satellites, and you can see they had a huge piece of it taken out because it did become cancerous in this person. So it has to be watched like a hawk. Aging effect on CMN. They typically are flat in childhood, and they get thicker and more hairier and more warty looking. Of course, you don't call it warty looking, you call it more verrucas. They get more verrucas with the passage of time. They can even get nodular looking. Differential diagnosis for that has to be the great imitator seborrheic keratosis. What's the risk for cancer? The large ones can become and do become cancerous, so you have to be careful with those. A rule of thumb is the risk for melanoma formation, and when they become cancerous, because they're a precursor to a melanocyte, they are melanoma. So the risk is proportional to the size of the lesion. So the bigger it is, the bigger the chances it has as becoming cancers. The small ones very rarely become cancer, so you don't have to worry about them. Just keep an eye. I mean, you always keep an eye on skin lesions for change. Change is an indication that it might be turning cancers. So what do you think of this one? It's a 45-year-old male. It measures 12 millimeters in size. It's been present since birth. Do you worry about that? No, not if it's been there and it hasn't changed in size. It's grown some hair, patient says. No, that's just a CMN. That's a congenital melanocytic nevi. It's small. It doesn't have a great risk factor for becoming cancerous. It could be, you have to differentiate, it could be that great imitator, seborrheic keratosis. I mean, it could be malignant melanoma, but based on the history, it's not. I mean, I'm not, I mean, if you don't know the history, you have to refer this out. If you just looked at the patient's back, oh, I never knew that was there, then you got to refer it out. But if they say, oh, God, I've had that since I was a little kid, I was born with that, then nah, you don't have to worry about it. Always keep an eye on it, make a note about it, and watch it. What about medium-sized CMN? Again, between 1.5 centimeters and 20 centimeters, there's a medium risk for it to become cancerous. Most authors agree that these have to be monitored fairly closely. Like once a year, you need to see the dermatologist to take a look at that. Many authors go a step further and say not only that, you should take a biopsy so you can see how far the nest is down into the dermis. If that nest is already in the deep dermis, then they recommend removing it. Okay, what is this one? Here's a 4 centimeter lesion. It's been there since birth. What do you think of that? Well, it's a CMN, right? That's a medium-sized CMN, and you just have to monitor it. Medium-sized have to be monitored yearly by a dermatologist. If the patient has no clue, oh, I've never seen that before. When did that come? They've got to go to the dermatologist. If they say, oh, this has been there by, for years and years, then you should say, has a dermatologist looked at it? No, you need these. The research says that these can become cancer, so you should be followed by a dermatologist. How about this one? There's a 32-year-old. There's an 18 centimeter in the inguinal region. It's been there since birth. What do you do with that? Well, the same story. Do they have a dermatologist? Has it been evaluated by the dermatologist? Dermatologist will measure it each year and see if it's growing. And they have these gigantic magnifying goggles they put on and can look more closely at it. So these have to be monitored. That's another medium-sized CMN. It's got to be monitored, maybe biopsied. Your job is just to refer to the dermatologist. The large ones, so if they compromise more than 5% of the body surface, it's classified as large. More specifically, though, if it's between 20 centimeters and 50 centimeters, it's large. These ones you have to be very careful with. There's a significant risk of them turning into malignant melanoma. It's about a 5% risk of it becoming cancerous, and 50% of these, if it's going to become cancerous, 50% of the cancer will occur immediately not immediately, but by the age of 5. So if it's large, they recommend these be removed because of that high chance of cancer. Right, there's a giant hairy nevus. All right, let's go back to the acquired ones that appear in childhood. They literally show up. Your kid may not be born with them, and maybe at age 5, oh, look on the form, they got a little spot. What's that? That's probably a mole. It's probably no big deal, but you need to keep an eye on it. That can happen up to the 3rd decade of life. It's a little more unusual after the 3rd decade of life for them to show up de novo, especially after the age of 50. If you got a lesion that pops up, you should get that checked. I mean, I had some seborrheic keratosis pop up when I hit 60. And I followed my own rules, even though I knew it was SK. I went to the dermatologist, and she goes, "Yeah, it's SK, but it's. I mean, now we know. I have it on my chart. It's measured, and we'll keep an eye on it. I'll see you in 5 years." So you got to watch this stuff, right? 'Cause melanoma will kill you. That can kill you really, really fast. So you can't play with that. Let's see what else here. Yeah, we got that slide done, I think. Some wives' tales. I always thought it was wise tales, but it's wives' tales. You should never pluck a hair from a mole because it'll make the mole come cancerous. Absolutely ridiculous. And my mom used to tell me stuff like this. But they didn't know back then. That's not true. It will not make it become cancerous. Or you shouldn't pick at it. I mean, you shouldn't because it might get infected, but it's not going to make it become cancerous if you pick it off or it gets ripped off or something like that. You don't have to worry about that. What about when will it become cancerous, or does it become run-of-the-mill nevi, become acquired nevi, become cancerous? It's really quite low, but there is an increase for ones under 15 millimeters. That's really quite low. The risk does increase if you have a lot of these on your body. In fact, there's a direct relationship between the number of nevi you have on your body and the risk for melanoma. So if you have 5,000 of them, you have a high risk for melanoma. If you have 5 of them, you have a very low risk for it becoming cancerous. The shape, they typically remain the same shape and color. They may fade with the passage of time, though. Again, if a mole changes, this is very important. If a mole you've had for your whole life changes rapidly, changes color, especially if it gets dark or if it grows blood vessels, that's got to be seen by a dermatologist immediately. Look at this one. So if I looked at this, I mean, it's fairly round. It's 8 millimeters, so it breaks the ABCs. It's variegated, very lightly variegated. I mean, this looks like seborrheic keratosis to me. This actually turned out to be a junctional nevus. But that's just the point being, they can look very similar. So, I mean, melanomas usually don't. Superficial spreading melanoma usually is more densely variegated than this. But it could be a melanoma. So again, follow the ABCs. If the patient says, "Oh, that's been there for years and years, it hasn't changed, I'm not that worried about it." If the patient goes, because you're looking at the patient's back, right? If the patient goes, "Oh, geez, I never know," you take a picture with your iPhone and show it. "I never knew I had that there." That breaks the ABCs. It's got to go to the dermatologist to get checked, even though it looks like seborrheic keratosis, or it doesn't look like a typical mole, but that one ended up having nest cells, which is a little strange. They may be variegated, as we just saw. That's a variegated nevus. So that's a little unusual, but they can be, but it's usually not coarsely variegated. It's very faintly variegated. And yeah, but you still got to go by the ABCs because that could be early melanoma. If it is melanoma, it's going to change size really, really quick. That's the way you can tell it's melanoma. If it's just a mole, it sits there and does nothing. The adolescent growth spurt is another high risk time for these. I don't want to say risk because they're really not that much of a risk, but they do tend to pop up at that time. So follow the ABCs. And yep, there's those subdivisions again. The JCD. I know a person with initials like that, so it's easy for me to remember. They tend to grow deeper. Yeah, we said that with the passage of time. All right, let's look at the individual now. So usually the first one you develop is a junctional nevi. Usually pops up in childhood or during the adolescent growth spurt. And it's usually flat. It's a macule. It's usually a couple millimeters in size. If it's variegated, it's going to be very lightly variegated and not coarsely variegated. It's not going to have any blood vessels within it. It won't be telangiectatic. Remember, telangiectasia is those blood vessels. It's not verrucas. Remember verrucas? There's one for your vocabulary words. That's warty-like. It's not verrucas at all. And there's the run-of-the-mill junctional nevi. It's like 3 centimeters. This one's a little faintly variegated. But yeah, there it is. It popped up and then it stopped growing. It grew, popped up in this teenager, and then stopped. And it's been the same for many, many years. Right? They're typically hairless as well. They're not warty, non-verrucas. I think we said that. Their chances of becoming melanoma are rare. How would you know if it was going to become cancerous? It would grow. It would get bigger, probably rapidly. It would get more coarsely variegated. But any change is always a bad sign. You need to get a biopsy if a mole changes. The scary part is when they first pop up. If you watch your skin closely, you can. I had these SK lesions pop up on my forearms. I'm like, what the heck? They're popping up. I'm watching them month by month. And then they stopped. They got to a certain size. Some of them went away. Some of them stayed. But I said, you know what? That one breaks the ABCs. Going to the dermatologist just to have her look at it with the gigantic magnifying glasses. And yeah, SK lesion. Yep, so with the passage of time, junctional nevi can go into a new phase called a compound nevi. So those are usually a little deeper. A compound nevi can start de novo, but it usually doesn't. It usually progresses from a junctional. But as the nest drops down into the mid-dermis, these compound nevi. So what's the difference? So they're a little bit bigger. But they start to be elevated. That's the key with these. So they're not flat, and they're usually a little, that's the key. They're not flat. And have we not talked? I thought we got into compound nevi yet, but I guess we haven't. So I got ahead. Let's look at some of these. So what do you think of this one? It's flat, 4 millimeters. That's junctional nevus. What about this one? Well, that one's 9 millimeters. That breaks the ABCs. It is variegated. It's got kind of rough borders. That to me, I would refer that one out because that could be superficial spreading, early superficial spreading malignant melanoma. So just to protect your license, I'd refer that one out. But yeah, that one was seborrheic keratosis. Good. I'm going to say if that's a mole, I'm really confused on this. That's SK lesion. All right, compound nevus now. So now this is what I talk about. Nevi migrate down into the mid-dermis. They're more elevated. They're not flat anymore. They're still brown, but they're typically getting a little older, so they may not be as dark as junctional nevi. That rule doesn't always work, but typically they're a little bit lighter in color. They may start growing some hair at this point as well. They're not warty looking though. That's another key. Should have added in there. They're not warty looking. Didn't have a great picture here, but there's a little raised lesion. It's 4 millimeters, so it's tiny. It's the same color. There's no blood vessels in it. That's a run-of-the-mill mole. That's a run-of-the-mill junctional nevus. How about this one? Well, this one's a little interesting because it is a little verrucas looking, but it's not crazy big and crazy raised. So this one turned out to be a compound nevus, according to the dermatologist who published this. But I'm thinking because it's warty looking, it's getting very close to being a dermal nevus. But we'll still call it because you'll see when we get to dermal nevi, they're really warty. Looks like a drop of wax. It's a raised lesion. That's definitely a compound nevus. Another compound nevus. Oh, your alarm should be going off. It's bigger than 6 millimeters. It's variegated. There's a little raised region right here. The whole thing is raised a little bit. That's no good. That's superficial spreading malignant melanoma, and that is no good. Right? Immediately to the dermatologist, and don't have them wait. Oh, I can't get into the dermatologist for 6 months. You will call the dermatologist's office every day until you get a cancellation appointment. You will get in or you go to another dermatologist. This thing can kill you. All right, dermal nevi. So this is the last one. These are the older ones usually. They could start de novo, but they usually don't. They usually progress from others. And yeah, these are in the deep dermis. They are quite elevated in dome shape. They're typically very warty looking on the top, very distinct looking. So we don't call it warty, we call it verrucas. They're very verrucas. Or you could call it papillomatous is another word for warty. So papillomatous, make a note card of that, and verrucas, make a note card of that. They typically appear on the face, and you see what I mean? There's no doubt you've never seen anything like that close, bro. Maybe you know someone who's got one. My daughter has one. One of my daughters has one of those. It's skin colored and it's in her hair. You can't see it, but it's in her hair. She showed it to me. It's a dermal nevus. Yep, so the light shades of brown, their flesh color. They could be black, but that's not the norm. They could have hair growing out of them. They can get fairly large, fairly raised. There is a big one that's too raised to be a compound nevus. Plus its fleshy color, that's a dermal nevus, classic dermal nevus. Now telangiectasia. So this is no good. If they start developing blood vessels within them, that means rapid growth is occurring. That's a very strong indication that it's becoming cancerous. If you see telangiectasia, they have to be referred. Would you refer that one? Doctor says, the patient says, it's been there for years. Nobody sees it. That's exactly what my daughter's looks like. It's got hair coming out of it. It's warty looking. That's a dermal nevus. Not that exciting, really. There's an atypical dermal nevus. Same thing. I don't see any telangiectasia. I'm not worried about that. This one looks innocent, but I'm worried about this one. See the blood vessels? See how they grow through here? That's telangiectasia. There's rapidly growing cells. That one has to be biopsied. You would think it's a dermal nevus, but you just don't know. You got to send that one out for a biopsy. Yeah, because it could be melanoma. It could be basal cell carcinoma. Could look like that as well. This one did turn out to be a dermal nevus, but you have to send those out. That's a basal cell carcinoma. That could well be a basal cell carcinoma because of the telangiectasia there. So that one should be sent out as well. That did turn out to be a dermal nevus. But you can't tell it apart from basal cell carcinoma. You have to biopsy it. What about this one? 4 millimeters, slightly raised. Okay, it's not super raised. It's not flat, so it can't really be a junctional nevus. It's not raised enough to be a dermal nevus, so it's a compound nevus. All right, so everything I just said, compound nevus. Yeah, they can be right there too. What do you think of that one? Well, it's not warty. It's not flat though, so it's probably another compound nevus. It's a little darker than usual, but it did turn out to be a compound nevus. I want you guys to be good with these. Any pigmented lesion suspected of breaking the ABC rules, unless the patient says, oh, that's been there since birth, it's a CMN. If it breaks the rules, they need to go to the dermatologist. It's easy to write that. Give them a slip. Here's a referral to a dermatologist. Put that in the travel card. If they don't go, it's on them. As long as you have proof that you referred them, you don't want their family coming back after you 2 years later saying, my daughter died of a malignant melanoma and you missed it. You were treating it. It's right on her back. Why didn't you refer her? And you say, I'm really sorry about your loss, but here's a referral slip. I referred her and she never went. All right. Sorry again, I couldn't be there in person. I'm getting so tired of talking to imaginary people. Next quarter looks like we'll be back. So, all right. See you guys later.